Remember when you first watched one of your favorite TV shows from the 90s on DVD and realized there were deleted scenes? Well, in editing our Davis Rules episode, we realized that some parts of our discussion went off on tangents that didn't really fit with the plot, but they're fun and interesting nevertheless. So welcome to our first ever bonus episode from That Was a Show? Davis Rules Deleted Scenes. Enjoy.
That was a show?
The podcast about failed or forgotten sitcoms from the 80s and 90s, starring
Brynn Byrne,
Aaron Yeger,
And Andrew Helmer as Barry.
a Radio Gizmo production.
It's almost as if the writers of the show would come up with ideas for scenes. Like, I'd like to see him in this location, or I'd like to see these two characters come together in this type of moment. And then those scenes are put on index cards and then tossed in the air.
Yeah.
And then they land in a certain order, and then that's just how it plays out.
It's funny you guys mentioned about how, it's such a Dennis Quaid role. But the more I listen to you guys talk about it, the more I'm like, man, do I want to see Dennis Quaid play a Randy Quaid role?
Yeah.
Like, I want to see, like, whenever the next time that they reboot the Vacation series,
Right.
I want them to call the wrong Quaid and get Dennis to play, cousin Eddie in the new
Or like
Vacation
get
movies.
Dennis
Why
a
not?
cameo in It's Always Sunny or something like that. Like, I'd like to see him just cut loose in a silly way.
Yeah.
If anybody out there is listening and like knows of a great like Dennis Quaid cutting loose movie, please let us know.
There's that scene where the original principal has resigned and they're all voting to decide who the principal is going to be. So, like, first of all, do schools
Just like real life.
Do schools actually do that?
Like,
That's not how principals are chosen, is it?
No, Aaron, it isn't. But and it isn't even then. They have to have. There's a throwaway line of dialogue in the episode that says we're like school run management or something like that. They're not part of a school board or anything like that. They manage themselves, which is not a thing.
Okay, and
maybe it is. Anybody out there, don't come at me. I don't really.
But
I don't really
We're
care,
not that
but
invested.
in the scene, we're not invested enough to research
I
this
just
further.
have never heard of a school that basically makes all of its own rules and like gets to appoint its own principal based off of absolutely no form of vetting process. I was actually thinking about one of the only jokes I laughed at in the random season 2 episode I watched was a Bonnie Hunt's delivery of something, and it was just her character who had also not dated anybody in a while, and she says something like, I don't even know the last time I was touched except for that old man who grabbed me when I fell off the curb. And he didn't even hold on that long. And I was just like, oh my God.
There's some really rough things that are said by both men and women. There's so many lines crossed at his place of work. Like, he asks the Elaine character, like, what do you think about me as a man? Like, he's trying to get this woman who, at this point, he is the principal, his vice principal, to basically tell him whether or not he's fuckable, and like what, like,
and she keeps calling him cowboy.
But those two characters are friends.
Yeah, but there's still that dynamic of he's technically her boss, and like, she's not really comfortable with it, but she's like laughing about it. Bonnie Hunt gives an awkward line in the first episode of season 2 where she's trying to give her brother advice about dating. And she's like, why don't you just go to a bar, find a woman who's vulnerable, and she's had about 4 or 5 drinks, and then just talk to her. And he's like, well, I can't do that. I'm not just like any guy.
Yeah.
It's like, that's what normal guys do. They just find a vulnerable woman who's half in the bag. And,
now, in season 2, episode 1, the Elaine character is like starting to come on to him.
Yeah.
And there's this scene between them where he's trying to kind of recover from the woman he had fallen in love with moving to the Vatican to become a nun. And they're having this flirtation, and she's calling him a cowboy, and she's like flirting with him in his office. And it feels like, I mean, we didn't see enough of season 1 to know how these things evolved over time, but it feels like they were trying to decide what should the dynamic be between the two of them. And are they going to be built up as some sort of will they or won't they type of thing in season 2? It's really unclear.
I mean, I have a hard time thinking the writers would ever be mature enough to write material for her that went serious.
Yeah.
Like they really leaned into her, like, her shtick.
The mini golf scene. Somehow they try to lead us to believe that it's plausible that Dwight Davis would bring his son's new math tutor along with the whole family to mini golf on some sort of quasi date / bonding experience. They try to pull it into this romantic jumping off point between the two of them that is not good.
Sure, she's flirting with him a little bit, but he like does this creepy like thing where he brushes her hair out of her face, and then her response is to place her hair back where it was, which I was like, yeah. And then she's like, do it again. And then has him brush her hair out of her face again. It's so weird, and like the whole thing is really inappropriate. He's hired her as her son's teacher, and when she subs at his school, he is her boss essentially. So yeah, it's super like inappropriate, but yeah, apparently we're supposed to be into it and we're supposed to root for them.
They don't even try to build up his character as in any way alluring to her. Like it is just very out of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
Like this car just goes 0 to 60 so fast, from her being skeptical about even being the tutor for this guy's son because he's an experienced teacher. So why do they even need a tutor? And then she agrees to be the tutor. All 3 generations of guys in this household are like undressing her as soon as she arrives in the house. And now she's just like super into it. The whole thing plays out as this sort of fantasy fever dream in his own head that is not at all plausible.
And they managed to wedge in the exposition of her almost becoming a nun.
Yeah, but I mean, on the plus side, they got to also wedge in 1990s TV's favorite pastime, mini golf.
Yeah. You're right. It was a thing. Yeah.
Why was mini golf such a thing back then?
I don't know.
I mean, I feel like I could look it up, but I don't want to.
You think it was like a product placement thing? Like it's a chain of like Big Mini Golf had a hand in this?
Big Mini Golf? That's kind of funny. I played mini golf in the 90s and I loved mini golf.
I also just wanted to note that Danny Jacobson, who was one of the creators of Davis Rules, he went on to create Mad About You, one of his more successful shows from the 90s later on. Won a bunch of Emmys. It had about 7 seasons, and it did an 8th season as a reboot. But it's like
this year.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
Yeah. Did it ever end up coming out, or did it get delayed?
I have no idea. There's a bunch of episodes listed online, and it was apparently being shown on some sort of streaming platform, but it seems like a very obscure streaming platform. But I don't know. I don't know if it's been released. There's no like footage of it anywhere. So
yeah, I guess it came out. It all came out last year.
Yeah,
November to December of 2019. I was never a Mad About You guy.
Huh.
I found it fascinating as a kid to like. I was very fascinated with urban sitcoms. I thought it was so cool that people lived in apartments.
I did too.
Oh, I wonder what it's like to live in an apartment. And of course, I know now what it's like to live in an apartment.
All I know about Mad About You is it was on a lot in my house growing up because my parents were so into that show.
They would be, though. I could see how they'd be like Paul Reiser stans. Like,
but if I remember correctly, on Thursday nights, I think Mad About You was on. Was it before Seinfeld or something?
I want to say that the lineup probably went Friends at 8, Mad About You at 8:30, Seinfeld at 9.
It was probably the 8:30 show.
So many of you right now don't know what the hell we're talking about.
You used to have to watch TV as it aired. So you had to know when they were on, or you would never see it again. I always associated Mad About You with like marital lameness because Seinfeld.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, of
There's
course.
the whole gag about Susan taping Mad About You. And then even at the time, I got why that was funny. I knew
As
that,
what, like a 9-year-old or a...
Yeah, I knew that George was making mistakes.
As an even as an adolescent.
The end credits, there's a great Seinfeld end credits, and it's just Susan and George in bed, and you just hear the Mad About You.
The opening theme music of Mad About You.
And
with the flicker of the TV.
And it lasts for 30 seconds, and it's just the theme music, and it still makes me laugh. It still makes me laugh so hard.
That's one of my favorite scenes in Seinfeld.
And does he look miserable?
Miserable.
Yeah.
It's like right after he gets engaged. Yeah. And then it's like, George, come to bed. You're going to miss Mad About You or something. And the shot is a recreation of the same visual gag of when George is in bed with his dad, who's crashing at his apartment because George's parents are separated. And his dad's in bed next to him. And he's got the bowl of kasha. And George picks some up off the blankets.
I think it's also one of the great I can't go gags. Jerry calls George and she calls from the other room and says, I taped Mad About You. And then George goes, I can't go.
It's like some late night showing of an action movie or something like that. Yeah.
Aww.
Oh, it's so nice to talk about. So nice to talk about shows we enjoy and make us laugh for real.
Exactly.
Ha 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 ha, and then the credits roll, and then the blah 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 blah.
Beep boop 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 beep boop.
That Was a Show is a production of Radio Gizmo. Subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and follow us on Instagram for info about upcoming episodes. If you enjoyed the show, tell your friends about it.
Next time on That Was a Show. So it's the most 70s show made in the 80s about the 60s.
Yeah.
I'm glad we all looked up when it took place.
Yeah.
Yeah. You would never know when it was supposed to take place from watching it.
I like bingo.
Oh.
Although, why is he a California surfer in Chicago?
That's what I'm trying to understand.
Yeah.
I'm desperately trying to understand that. I guess Joni really does love Chachi.
Yeah.
But Joni loves Chachi.
That's the difference. Radio Gizmo.